Chapter 1. The Path Above the Sea. The path to the lighthouse runs along the shoulder of the cliff, where the grass grows low and silvered under the moon. At this hour, the world is made of quiet distances. The sea lies open and dark below, breathing against the rocks in long, even washes. Above it, the sky is clear enough to seem almost weightless, a wide bowl of stars resting over the water. And there, at the edge of stone and wind, the lighthouse keeps its patient place. Its beam turns slowly through the night. Each time the light passes, the cliff path brightens for a moment. The pale gravel, the tufted grass, the weathered posts along the curve, then settles again into moonlight. Nothing startles in this rhythm. The beam does not search. It simply moves, as it always has, in its measured circle over sea and horizon, over the black backs of distant swells, over the quiet emptiness between one shore and another. The archivist stands for a while before going in. There is no hurry in the standing. The night itself seems to ask for this small pause, this moment of arrival in which the body loosens from whatever came before and begins to match the pace of the place. Salt drifts in on the wind, cool and clean. It settles on the lips, on the lashes, on the cuffs of a coat. Far below, water folds over stone and draws back again, carrying with it a low whisper that never entirely stops. The lighthouse rises from the cliff in pale, weathered stone, its walls holding the memory of many seasons of rain, mist, and sun. In daylight, every seam and stain would show plainly, but under the moon, the tower looks gentler, almost smoothed by light, as though the years have been softened rather than erased. The lantern chamber at the top glows with a steady warmth behind its glass. Brass within catches and releases the turning light in brief, honey-colored gleams. The archivist knows these surfaces well. The roughness of the outer stone, the iron latch of the door, the narrow windows set into thick walls, the stair that winds upward inside, like a thought repeated so often it becomes a kind of music. Yet, each night, there is also the small grace of seeing it anew, as though the lighthouse has been waiting in its own attentive silence to be met again. The wind comes across the water and around the tower, slipping through grass, brushing the hem of the coat, moving with the ease of something that has traveled far. It carries many faint things with it: kelp and salt, cold from the open sea, the mineral scent of damp rock. Sometimes, if one listens with no wish to name too quickly, it seems to carry older traces as well. The passing murmur of foghorns from nights long gone, the ghost soft creak of distant rigging, the hush of rain that once moved in gray curtains across the bay. Not memories exactly, and not sounds one can hold, only impressions, light as spray, arriving and fading. This is part of the work here. Not only to keep the lamp turning above the sea, though that matters. Not only to tend the glass and brass, to note the tides, to watch the weather and the horizon. There is another kind of keeping too, quieter and less easily named. The lighthouse gathers what passes near it. A ship's brief light on the water, a change in the wind just after moonrise. The way the swell sounds different against the eastern rocks than the western ones. The small, unrepeatable character of a single night. These things drift by and might be lost at once if no one noticed. But here, in this high place of stone and lantern light, they are received. The archivist breathes in, and the breath leaves slowly. Below, the sea is mottled with moonlight, silver laid across black in long, wavering paths. Farther out, where the beam reaches and moves on, the water flashes and dims, flashes and dims, as though the ocean itself were blinking in a great, restful sleep. Near the horizon, a ship passes at such a distance that it seems hardly more than a patient star set low upon the water. Its light remains steady. For a moment, the beam finds it, touches it, and lets it go. There is companionship in that brief exchange. The tower does not call attention to itself. It offers orientation, and then returns to silence. The passing ship continues on its way. The sea keeps breathing. The stars remain where they are, older than all ledgers, all names, all crossings, and still the small human act of tending this light matters. It matters in the same quiet way that a hand laid on a familiar table matters, or a window opened at dusk, or a page turned carefully so it will not tear. Some tasks make the world no larger, and yet more habitable. This is one of them. The path curves gently upward over the last rise. The lighthouse door waits in its recess, dark wood set into stone, its brass worn smooth by years of touch. But still the archivist lingers outside, letting the night settle fully. From here, the land behind the tower is almost hidden. What remains is cliff, sky, and sea. The sense of an edge, not sharp or perilous, but clear. A place where one element meets another, and both are allowed to remain themselves. The stone does not resist the sea. It receives its weathering. The sea does not hurry the stone. It returns and returns in its own time. The light turns through both, touching each without disturbance. A gull, wakeful somewhere along the rocks, gives a single low call and then is quiet again. The beam passes over the archivist's shoulder and reaches out across the water. In its turning, there is already the beginning of the night's deeper rhythm. Soon, there will be the inward sounds, the door closing softly against the wind, the familiar creak of wood, the low hum of the mechanism above. The first lamp lit below the stronger lantern. There will be stairs underfoot, brass under cloth, pages under the resting hand. There will be observations entered in ink while the sea speaks beyond the walls. But for now, there is only this threshold hour, this open breathing space before the interior gathers close. The archivist places a hand briefly against the stone beside the door. It is cool with night air, faintly damp where the mist has touched it. Solid, enduring, and not unkind. The tower answers in the way old structures do, not with words, but with presence. A slight retained warmth from the day, hidden somewhere in its depth. A stillness that is never empty. A sense that the night's watch has already begun, and that one is simply stepping into a rhythm already in motion. Again, the sea rises and falls below. Again, the beam turns. And under the clear, star-filled sky, on the path above the moonlit water, the archivist stands a little longer in the salt wind, held between the wide outer dark and the warm rooms waiting within, listening as the lighthouse and the ocean keep each other company. Chapter 2. The door, the coat, the warm interior. After that small pause on the threshold of night and shelter, the archivist lifts a hand to the iron latch. The door gives with a familiar weight, not all at once, but slowly, as though it too has been listening to the sea and is reluctant to interrupt. A ribbon of cooler air slips in first, carrying salt and the faint, clean scent of damp stone. Then the door opens wider, and the interior of the lighthouse receives the night in its own quiet way. At once, the sounds change. Outside, the wind had room to travel. It moved along the cliff and over the grasses and out above the dark water, gathering distance into itself. Inside, every sound is nearer, softened by walls that have held weather for years and still remain steady. The sea is not gone. It is only translated. Its wash arrives through stone and floorboards as a low, patient murmur. The turning mechanism above offers its faint, revolving hum. Somewhere in the height of the tower, metal answers metal with a small, regular note, delicate as the tapping of a fingernail on glass. The archivist steps in and draws the door closed behind them. The wind presses once against the outer wood, then settles outside again, moving on along the curved wall of the tower. The latch falls into place with a quiet, final click. It is not the sound of shutting anything out entirely. Rather, it is the sound of choosing a smaller circle of night, one with lamplight and stone and known corners. For a moment, the archivist remains just inside, allowing the room to gather around them. The entry is simple and worn into usefulness. The floor bears the faint, dulled sheen of many careful passings. The walls, thick and pale, keep the memory of old lime wash beneath the present dimness. A narrow bench rests beside the wall, Above it, a row of wooden pegs has been polished smooth by years of coats, scarves, and the brief touch of hands returning at dusk or later, in rain, in mist, in clear weather such as this. The archivist loosens the coat at the throat and slips it free with unhurried movements. The fabric carries the chill of the cliff path and a little of the sea's moisture. When it is hung upon its peg, a few grains of dried salt catch the low light and then disappear again. Beside it hangs a scarf, folded from some earlier watch, and below the bench stand a pair of weather-marked boots with their toes turned slightly outward, as if still remembering the shape of walking. These small arrangements have the quiet order of repetition. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is neglected. The lighthouse asks for this kind of attention and gives it back in return. The archivist sets a hand against the inner wall. The stone is cool, but not cold in the way of the outer air. It has an inward coolness, deep and even, as though the tower keeps its own weather. Beneath the palm, there is the faintest tremor of life from within the structure. The subtle traveling vibration of the mechanism above. The long conversation between beam and gear and turning weight. The lighthouse does not sleep. It rests while remaining awake. And in that wakefulness, the archivist is never entirely alone. A small table stands near the foot of the stair, and on it, a lamp waits. Its brass base is worn to a soft glow where fingers have lifted it night after night. The glass chimney is clear, recently cleaned, holding in its curved surface a blurred reflection of wall, hand, and shadow. The archivist strikes a match. For an instant, there is the dry whisper of flame coming into being. A brief gold flare, bright enough to warm the knuckles and wake the brass. Then the wick takes. The little lamp blooms gently, not to rival the great lantern above, but to answer it in a lower voice. Amber light spills over the tabletop, across the grain of old wood, and outward onto the nearest stones. Shadows gather in the mortar lines and under the bench. The room, which a moment ago was only dimly waiting, now seems to exhale. Edges soften. The tower's interior becomes visible not all at once, but by degrees, as if remembering itself. The archivist adjusts the flame until it burns steadily. Above, beyond several turns of stair and the lantern glass itself, the main light continues its patient work. Its presence can be felt even from here. Every so often, a paler, shifting brightness passes over the narrow window by the door, the beam making its slow circuit over sea and cliff and open distance. It is a rhythm already established before the archivist enters, and one that will continue long after any single task is done. To come inside is not to begin the night entirely, but to join it. The wooden stair rises from the entry in a spiral of worn treads and smooth central column. Brass fittings catch the lamp's glow in small, mellow glints. The handrail, darkened by use, curves upward with a patient grace. Looking at it, the archivist can almost feel the tower's shape with the body alone. The first turn, the narrow slit windows, the broadening near the work table above, the higher stair to the lantern room, where glass and brass keep company with the moving light. But for now, there is no need to climb yet. Opening rituals are small and close to hand. They belong to the threshold between outside and in, between sea wind and enclosed warmth. The archivist bends to set the boots more neatly beneath the bench, then straightens a folded cloth left to dry there earlier. A hand passes over the table to align a box of matches with the lamp's base. These are not corrections, so much as acknowledgments. The room is greeted through touch. From deeper within the tower comes a creak in the wood, a long, low, settling note. Then another, lighter one overhead. The stone answers with silence, and the silence is not empty. It is full of recognition. The lighthouse has taken the measure of the wind outside, the damp in the air, the particular steadiness of this clear night. It adjusts itself almost imperceptibly, as old structures do, speaking in tiny sounds to those who know how to listen. The archivist listens. There is the sea below, washing the base of the cliff in slow intervals. There is the wind moving around the tower's curve, and occasionally finding the edge of a window frame with a soft, passing breath. There is the hum above, continuous and calm. There is the lamp beside the stair, its flame making a small interior weather of warmth and faint glass clicks. And beneath all of it, there is the sense of many nights layered gently together, each one leaving behind something nearly weightless. A trace of salt at the sill, a polished place on brass, a page waiting farther in with room for another line of handwriting. The archivist takes a slow breath, and the room seems to breathe with them. Warmth here is never grand. It is modest and sufficient. It gathers in the lamplight, in the shelter of walls, in the familiar nearness of objects that have outlasted many seasons by being well tended. It lives in the dry wood of the bench, in the smooth handle of the lamp, in the coat now hanging still instead of lifting in the wind. It lives, too, in the simple fact of enclosure. The cliff and sea remaining close, yet held at a kindly distance by stone. Beyond the narrow window, the beam passes once more, laying a brief silver brightness across the glass before moving on over the dark water. The archivist turns toward the stair at last, one hand resting lightly on the rail, while behind them, the closed door keeps its quiet watch, and the small lamp steadies the first room of the night. Chapter 3. Polishing the brass, tending the light. The archivist begins to climb. The stair curves upward through the body of the lighthouse in a slow, white spiral, each stone step slightly hollowed at its center by many years of passing feet. The handrail is cool beneath the palm, brass gone dim in places where salt has breathed over it. warmer and smoother where it has been touched and retouched through countless nights. Above, the faint revolving hum continues, patient and even. Below, the small lamp in the entry room leaves a soft amber memory against the lower wall. And then that, too, is hidden by the turn of the stair. Up here, the sea is never absent. It rises through the tower as sound rises through a shell, altered by stone and height, but always itself, a long wash over rock, a quieter withdrawing. The distant buoy note, low and rounded, drifting in at measured intervals. The wind, gentled now by walls and narrow windows, moves around the tower with a soft edge, as though circling in company with the light. At the first landing, the archivist pauses, not from effort, but from habit. Through a narrow pane, the night opens briefly. The cliff below, silvered grass lying still, and beyond it, the broad, dark water, carrying the moon in broken paths. The beam passes over the sea and keeps going, a pale arm laid out over distance. Then it is gone again, and the window returns to its quiet square of darkness and stars. The stair continues. The lighthouse gives its familiar small replies. A creak in the wood above, a faint tremor in the rail, the almost inaudible click that marks one part of the mechanism handing its work to another. None of it asks for concern. These are the sounds of a place awake and steady in its task. The archivist knows them as one knows the breathing of a sleeping house. At last, the lantern chamber opens above, and the air changes. It is cooler here, touched by glass and height, and the near presence of the lamp. The room is ringed with windows, each pane holding a different portion of the night. Sea to one side, cliff to another, farther darkness beyond. And overhead, the clear spread of stars. Brass rails arc around the chamber in graceful curves. The lamp itself turns with grave consistency, neither hurried nor slow, only exact. The archivist stands for a moment before beginning, allowing the chamber to settle around them. The floor carries a slight vibration from the mechanism below. The beam glides past, brightening one frame of glass, then another, before returning to where it began. In its measured circuit, there is something almost like breathing. Light, dimming, light again. A cloth is taken from a drawer built into the wall. Another cloth follows, softer, already carrying the faint, clean scent of oil and metal. The archivist folds one over the fingers and begins with the nearest section of rail. The work is simple and exact. A slow pass along the brass, a turn of the wrist, a second pass where salt has left a pale film. The metal answers gradually, not with a sudden shine, but with a deepening warmth, as though the gold color has been sleeping just beneath the surface and is willing now to return. The cloth moves in small circles around the uprights, along the smooth curve of the rail, over the fittings that hold each part in place, As the archivist works, the beam keeps turning. Light slips over the polished sections and lingers there for a breath before moving on. Duller places remain in shadow a little longer, waiting their turn. It is a quiet conversation between hand and metal, between maintenance and time. Nothing is forced. Everything yields by degrees. The brass has its own memory. It remembers salt wind and damp mornings, summer haze and winter clarity, the touch of hands separated by years, but joined by the same care. Tonight's polishing does not erase those seasons. It simply makes room for the next clear reflection, the next passing of light across a surface kept ready. When the rail is done, the archivist lifts the cloth to the window latches and hinges, attending to each one with the same calm precision. The glass panes are checked in turn. No hurried inspection, only a steady looking. A thumb rests near the edge of a frame. A latch is tested. One pane is wiped where a fine breath of salt has dried into a faint blur. Another receives a slower polish until the stars beyond it appear sharper, as if the sky itself has been gently brought nearer. From this height, the sea surrounds the chamber almost completely. It is no longer the distant expanse first seen from the path. Here, it feels close and encompassing, held in fragments by every window. In one pane, moonlight lies flat and silver. In another, darkness gathers where the cliff interrupts the shore. In another, the beam travels outward and touches the skin of the water so briefly that it seems to write and erase a line in the same motion. The archivist moves to the mechanism housing. Brass teeth, iron rods, the contained strength of weights and gears hidden partly below the floor. The hum here is fuller, accompanied by a small, regular ticking, each sound nested inside the next. A hand rests lightly on the casing, feeling the fine vibration that runs through it. The lighthouse is old, but not frail. Its age is held in use, in adjustment, in the way each part has learned the measure of the others. A small tool is lifted. One fitting is checked, then another. A drop of oil is placed with care where motion asks for ease. The archivist listens after each touch, not expecting change so much as confirming balance. The beam continues its patient circle. The mechanism answers with the same low, trustworthy note. It is easy in such a room to feel that the tower is not merely built of stone and glass and metal, but gathered from repetitions, step after step, night after night, cloth over brass, pen over paper, wind over sea. The lighthouse keeps these patterns the way rock keeps warmth after sun has gone. Quietly, without display, releasing them slowly into the hours. The archivist wipes the last trace of oil from the fingertips and folds the cloth again. Around the chamber, brass now catches the lamp in softened arcs. The windows stand clear. The latches rest firm, Beyond them, the night remains wide and undisturbed. For a while, there is nothing more to do. So the archivist stands beside the turning light and watches it move. Across glass, across brass, across the open water. The sea receives it without comment, letting each pass arrive and fade. Far below, waves continue their old conversation with the rocks. High above, the stars hold their still arrangement. And within the lantern chamber, the mechanism hums on with a sound so even, it seems less like machinery than a pulse. Steady in the tower, steady in the hand that has tended it, steady in the long, attentive night. Chapter 4. The Tide Ledger. After a time, the archivist leaves the lantern chamber and begins the slow descent. The white stair curves downward through the tower's cool interior, each step carrying a faint memory of many feet, though now there is only this one familiar tread. Above, the lamp continues its patient turning. Its presence follows, even where it cannot be seen directly, arriving as a soft change in brightness at the narrow windows, as a living hush of mechanism, as a steady awareness held somewhere overhead. The brass rail is warm in places from the touch of the hand, cooler where the air from the stone has settled over it. Below, the lower rooms wait in their accustomed quiet. The archivist passes one landing, then another, and comes at last to the small room where the records are kept. It is not a large room, but it has the feeling of being deeper than its walls. Shelves line one side, holding ledgers and logbooks whose spines have taken on the softened colors of long use. Weathered blue, faded green, brown like driftwood dried in shade. A narrow desk stands beneath a window set deep in the stone. The glass there is old enough to bend the moonlight slightly, so that the sea beyond appears not altered exactly, but gently translated into the language of the room. A lamp burns on the desk with a low amber flame, smaller and warmer than the great light above. Its glow rests on paper, on ink bottle, on the smooth handle of a pen worn pale where fingers have held it over many seasons. The archivist draws out the chair and sits. For a moment, there is no writing yet, only listening. The sea is here, as it is everywhere in the tower, though softened by walls and distance. It comes upward through the stone as a low wash, a breathing undersound beneath the little creaks of wood and the fine metallic murmur from above. Now and then, the wind passes around the outer curve of the lighthouse and leaves a brief whisper at the window frame. Farther out, almost folded into the night, a buoy gives its patient note. The room receives each sound and keeps it gentle. On the desk lies the tide ledger. Its cover is darkened by years of handling, its corners rounded, its spine repaired more than once with careful strips of cloth. When the archivist opens it, the pages release a faint, dry fragrance of paper, dust, and salt. There are columns ruled by hand, headings written in an old, steady script, dates running back through seasons of calm and fog, of winter swells and summer stillness. Some pages carry a grain of sand caught long ago in the fold. Some bear the slight bloom left by damp air. None of it feels like damage. It is simply the weather of keeping. The pen is lifted. The ink is uncapped. The nib touches the page. Tonight's date is written first. Then, in the measured order established long before this night, and likely before many others, the archivist begins to note what the tower has witnessed. Tide, its height, its hour, its slow intention along the rocks below. Wind, its direction, not only where it travels from, but how it has chosen to move around the cliff. Whether it comes clean and cool from open water, or softened by passing over the dark, sleeping land. Moon, high and clear, laying silver across the sea, path by path, brightening the shoulders of waves, touching the outer stone of the tower. Sky, mostly open, stars numerous, their arrangement untroubled, visibility far enough that the horizon seems less an edge than a resting place where darkness and light have agreed to meet. The words are not many. They do not need to be. Yet, each one settles into the page with a kind of fullness, as though the ink gathers more than language can entirely hold. A line about the tide also keeps the shape of the shore at this hour. A note on the wind preserves the way it sounded moving through the grass on the cliff. The moon's position remembers not only its height, but the look of the lantern glass when silver crossed it. Even the simplest mark beside the hour carries within it the hum of the mechanism, the coolness of the stair, the salt on the door ledge, the long, calm sweep of the beam over water. The archivist writes a little more. Sea state moderate, with a regular wash against the western rocks. A buoy audible to the south. Clouds absent. Light turning evenly. The final note is almost unnecessary, and yet it belongs here as much as any other. For the ledger is not only a record of conditions, it is a record of continuance. Night after night, page after page, the same elements return in altered arrangements, and the act of naming them becomes its own quiet devotion. The sea is never exactly the same sea, though it is always the sea. The wind changes voice. The moon arrives fuller or thinner, hidden or bright. Even the lamp, so constant in its duty, gives itself to each hour in a slightly different company of mist, darkness, or starshine. To write these things down is not to pin them in place. It is only to greet them as they pass. The archivist pauses and lets the pen rest. On the shelf nearby, older ledgers stand close together, their pages filled by other hands from other years. Some of the writing is darker, some more faded. Some entries lean slightly to one side, as though written at a desk touched by weather. Others are so even they seem almost printed. Together, they hold a long conversation between tower and sea. Not grand events, not declarations, but small, exact notices. Wind veering east by midnight. First fog of autumn along the lower water. Moon hidden until after the second watch. Gulls heard before dawn. Swell gentler than expected after rain. Such details might once have seemed to belong only to the hour in which they were observed. Yet here they remain, years later, still carrying their own weather. The archivist turns a few pages backward, not searching for anything in particular. There is comfort in seeing how one night leans softly into another. A spring tide from many seasons ago. A note of clear air after 3 days of mist. A winter moon, low and amber over rough water. An entry so brief it is nearly a breath. All quiet, lamp steady. The phrase rests there with complete sufficiency. Nothing more was required of that night than to be itself, and to be witnessed. The pages make a low sound as they turn, like a smaller version of waves along shingle. At the window, the beam passes and passes again. Each time it moves across the glass, the room brightens for an instant with a pale, revolving grace, then returns to lamplight. The archivist does not hurry. One more line is added in the margin. Not official, yet welcome. Stone holding the day's cool. Sea calm under the moon. The ink glistens briefly, then settles into the paper. Outside, the water continues its patient exchange with the shore. Above, the lamp keeps turning through its measured circle. Here at the desk, among weathered books and the warm, small pool of lamplight, the archivist closes the ledger only part way, leaving a hand within its pages, as though keeping place in an ongoing sentence. And in the quiet room, where old observations rest beside new ones, the night feels gathered rather than passing, held for a little while in ink, in paper, in listening, in the soft, enduring company of sea, sky, and stone. Chapter 5. Old Logbooks and Passing Ships. The archivist lets the hand rest a moment longer between the pages of the tide ledger, feeling the slight coolness of paper that has known many seasons. The lamp above continues its slow work, and each turn of it passes faintly through the records room as a soft change in brightness at the window. A pale sweep over the edge of the desk, a quiet reminder that the night is moving without haste. Then the hand withdraws, and the newer ledger is eased aside. On the shelf nearby stand the older volumes in their patient row. Some lean lightly against one another, as if tired in a companionable way after long years of standing watch. Their bindings have softened under salt air and handling. Cloth has faded from navy to ash blue, from green to the color of sea glass left many tides among stones. Corners are blunted. Labels have thinned. Here and there, a spine has been mended with a narrow strip of darker fabric, carefully stitched, so that the repair itself has become part of the book's face. The archivist draws one volume free. A little dust rises, though even the dust here seems touched by salt. The cover gives a faint sigh as it opens. Inside waits the close, dry scent of paper, ink, and years kept in a room where the sea is never absent, only softened by walls. The pages are thicker than those in the current ledger, their edges uneven, some faintly rippled where damp once visited and then departed. The handwriting changes from section to section. One keeper's script is upright and spare, another's rounded and slanting, another so small and neat it seems stitched rather than written. The archivist turns a page with the care one gives to thin shells or old leaves. There are entries of weather, of course. Wind north by east, low cloud over the western water, barometer steady, moon behind haze. Such notes lie across the years, like pebbles laid in a line, modest and exact. Yet between them are other traces, hardly more than a sentence, and these are the ones that seem to warm the room in a different way. At dusk, brigantine with red-brown sails seen beyond the outer shoal. The words are simple. The sail itself is long gone from the horizon, and perhaps the vessel as well. But the color remains, held in ink. Red-brown, a sail catching the last of the light. The archivist pauses there, and in the pause, the room seems to widen. Beyond the deep-set window, the sea breathes against the cliffs, and one might almost imagine that older evening still folded somewhere inside the present one, waiting only for a line of script to open it. Another page. Steamer southbound at second bell. Smoke low over calm water. The handwriting here is firmer, pressed a little deeper into the paper. Smoke low over calm water. That is all. Yet the phrase carries its own weather. One can feel the flatness of the sea, the settled air under which smoke does not rise quickly, but drifts, lingering above the vessel in a dark horizontal thread. The archivist reads it once, then again more slowly, as though listening to a voice through distance. Further on, there are names. Some are official, entered with date and direction. Some seem added later in the margin, perhaps after a signal exchanged, perhaps after a chart consulted at leisure. Mara Elling, North Star. Elise of Lund, St. Rowan. 3 names half faded where the page has been touched often, or where a little damp blurred the ink years ago. They are not introduced with ceremony. They simply appear, as ships do, on a horizon, and then in a logbook. Yet each name has a shape in the mouth, a small weight in the mind. The archivist does not try to summon full histories for them. It is enough that they passed this coast once, under moon or cloud or pale morning, and that someone here wrote them down before they slipped beyond sight. Another volume opens. Its binding is looser, the thread visible at the hinge. A pressed sprig of something fine and gray has been left between 2 pages long ago, and now it rests almost weightless, its fragrance gone, but its form intact. Lavender, perhaps, or a cliff herb gathered in summer and forgotten kindly inside the book. The archivist moves it aside with 2 fingers and reads. Lantern glass cleaned after sea mist. Fishing boat delayed by fog. Horn heard before dawn. No alarm lives in the sentence now. Time has gentled it. What remains is not the delay, but the image of a horn sounding somewhere in whiteness, while the lamp turned above unseen water. The archivist can hear, beneath the present wash of waves, the old quiet waiting that must have filled the tower then. A sound before dawn, a note carried through fog. Then, no doubt, the boat passing safely on. A few pages later, a smaller line, almost hidden between tide marks and wind direction. Crew on coastal sloop answered with 3 lantern dips. Cook waved a cloth from aft rail. The archivist's mouth softens, though no smile need be named. 3 lantern dips. A cloth waved from the stern by someone whose work was likely warm and ordinary. Bread, broth, a kettle, a galley lamp swaying gently with the sea. In the midst of bearings and currents, this remains. A cook waving to the lighthouse. A human gesture crossing dark water, seen and kept. The beam turns. Light shifts at the window and withdraws. Another book offers winter entries in a hand that grows larger on colder nights, as if gloved fingers had tightened around the pen. Ice at troughs of rock pools below East Cliff. Gulls absent till noon. Freighter westward. Lights blurred by sleet. Heard buoy after midnight. Very clear. The archivist lingers over that last note. Heard buoy after midnight. Very clear. Nothing more. Yet it contains a whole chamber of listening. The tower, the dark, the weather held at some distance by stone walls, and out beyond, the buoy speaking at intervals into the long, black water. The same buoy, perhaps, whose note still arrives tonight, softened by miles and years, but faithful in its cadence. So the books continue. Spring pages with penciled margins. Summer pages where the ink thins in heat. Autumn pages touched by damp. Their corners faintly furred and then carefully dried. A page noting swallows circling the lantern at dawn. Another noting a cargo ship carrying timber. The scent of resin somehow reaching the cliff after rain. Another, no more than 6 words. Moon path bright to the southern reef. The archivist reads without hurry, allowing each fragment to remain small. Nothing is pressed into a larger meaning than it asks for. The old keepers did not write to tell stories in full. They wrote to mark a passing shape, a condition of air, a vessel under certain light, a brief exchange between shore and sea. Yet gathered together, These slight notations form their own kind of companionship. Anonymous hands, years apart, have all leaned over this same desk, or one much like it. They have all listened for weather in the stone, watched the beam move over black water, and chosen a few words to save from the wide, dissolving night. At last, the archivist closes one book and rests a palm on its cover. Beneath the hand lies red-brown sail, low smoke, 3 lantern dips, the cook's waving cloth, the very clear buoy after midnight. Outside, the sea continues its endless folding and unfolding below the cliff. Above, the lamp turns in grave, familiar patience. And in the records room, among shelves that hold so many quiet crossings, the night feels gently peopled, not crowded, never loud, but companioned by all who have passed the horizon and all who have watched them go. Chapter 6. The stairs, the windows, the listening sea. For a little while longer, the archivist remains beside the closed logbook, with one hand resting on the softened cover, as if feeling, through cloth and paper, the faint warmth of all that has been kept there. The room is still. Only the small desk lamp glows in its amber circle. And beyond that circle, the shelves recede into a kindly dimness. The sea is present at the window, as it has been all night, not seen so much as heard. A long hush gathering itself among the rocks below, then loosening again into a patient wash. At length, the hand lifts. The chair gives a slight wooden murmur as the archivist rises. The pen is set straight beside the ink. The ledger waits where it was left, open to the present night. But no new line is added just now. There are hours in a watch that belong to writing, and hours that belong to listening. This is one of the listening hours. The door of the records room opens with its familiar, softened catch. Beyond it, the tower receives the archivist once more into its round interior coolness. The white spiral stair curves upward and downward at once, each direction vanishing around the wall. The brass rail, polished earlier, holds a muted gleam where the turning light from above wanders down in intervals. Stone keeps the night differently than the sea does. It does not move, and yet it is never entirely still. It stores chill, salt, echoes, and the fine tremor of the mechanism high overhead. The archivist places a hand on the rail and begins to climb. Footsteps on the worn steps are small and measured. Each one lands in a hollow made by many years of use. And the rhythm is easy enough that it scarcely seems like ascent. The tower has its own pace, and anyone who lives within it soon learns to borrow that pace rather than bring another. Upward a few steps, then a pause at the first landing, where a narrow window is set deep into the stone. The window is no wider than a shoulder, and its glass is old enough to bend the moonlight. Through it, the sea appears in a softened plane of silver and dark, the horizon drawn with a patient hand. Far out, where the beam has just passed, a buoy gives its distant note. It comes thinly through the night, a rounded sound, neither lonely nor near, only placed at its proper distance upon the water. The archivist listens until the note has gone, and the sea has folded over the silence it leaves behind. Then upward again. As the stair turns, the sounds change. At one height, the surf below seems broad and even, spread like cloth over the rocks. A few steps later, with the wall curving differently around the ear, the same water becomes more distinct. A hush, a break, a retreat through pebbled crevices, a soft return. Wind moves around the outside of the tower in long, light threads. Sometimes it presses gently at the stone and window frame. Sometimes it slips by with so little force that it is known only by the faintest seam of sound, as if the night itself were breathing beside the wall. At the next landing, the archivist stops again. This window faces more toward the cliff path and the dark shoulder of land beyond. The grasses there are pale under the moon, though from this height they look less like blades than like a sheen laid over the earth. The beam turns. For a moment, its brightness glides over the ground, over the path, over the weathered posts, and then it is gone, continuing outward over black water, where it lengthens and loosens into distance. Inside the tower, after each passage of the beam, there is a gentle dimming. Not darkness, never quite that, but a settling back into low interior shade. Then the brightness returns in its time, touching the opposite wall, the brass rail, the archivist's sleeve, the edge of the step. So the stair is never wholly one thing. It is always becoming a little lighter, a little softer, a little dim again, in the same slow measure that has guided ships and marked these walls for so many nights. The archivist does not hurry. There is no need. One hand rests on brass gone smooth with care, and the other occasionally brushes the stone, cool and faintly damp in places where the sea air has found its way in. The tower's living sounds accompany the climb. The low, revolving hum above, a delicate click at regular intervals, the slight answering creak of wood somewhere within the inner structure, and beneath all of it, the ocean, constant as breath in sleep. At a higher window, the sea lies farther below. From here, the waves are less individual and more like a wide, dark fabric, lifting and easing under moonlight. The buoy note reaches this height differently. It arrives thinner, more silvery, as though drawn through a longer thread of air. The archivist leans very slightly toward the glass, not to search for anything, but simply to receive what the night is already offering. There are other sounds too, so quiet they seem almost imagined until one stands long enough to know them. A faint tapping from a loose cord somewhere outside, the brief, dry tick of cooling metal, the whisper of the archivist's own sleeve when it moves against stone, breath entering, leaving. Breath entering, leaving. The tower gathers all of this without preference. It keeps large sounds and small ones together, as the ledgers keep moon height and wind direction beside the passing mention of a sail. The archivist descends a few steps then, only to hear the sea from another level. In the lighthouse, height is a kind of listening. What is broad above becomes intimate below. What is intimate below becomes spacious above. Midway between the records room and the lantern chamber, the waves seem nearest of all, though the cliff still lies beneath them. They sound here as if they are turning directly under the stone foundation, washing through the dark at the tower's feet, reading the outline of the rock over and over with cool hands. At one turn of the stair, there is no window, only wall. The absence of view sharpens the ear. Without moonlight to follow, the archivist stands still and lets the night arrange itself by sound alone. The revolving mechanism hums overhead in a patient circle. The sea rises and falls below. Wind traces the outer curve of the tower. Somewhere in the lower rooms, a board settles with a soft, familiar note. Not disturbance, but recognition, as if the lighthouse is shifting its weight more comfortably into the hour. When the archivist moves again, it is with the same ease, neither upward nor downward for long, but from landing to landing, pausing wherever the tower offers a different portion of the night. One narrow pane holds stars. Another holds only black water and the white seam of foam where waves meet rock. Another frames the far buoy's intermittent lamp, a pinprick appearing and disappearing in its own measured conversation with the dark. So the watch grows quieter, not emptier, but finer, more spacious between one sound and the next. At last, the archivist comes to rest on a step between levels, where the wall curves close and the brass rail is warm only from the touch of the hand. Above, the beam continues its slow turning. Below, the records room waits with its patient books. Around the tower, the sea goes on speaking in its old, unhurried language to cliff and stone and sleeping shore. And here, within the spiral, held between window and wall, between lamp and water, the archivist listens, as though listening were itself a form of keeping. Chapter 7. The Cliff Path Under Stars. After a time, the archivist rises from the step and continues upward, one hand resting lightly on the polished brass rail. The tower's inner coolness gives way, little by little, to a different air. It comes first as a finer thread of salt, then as a faint moving chill at the edge of the door above, as though the night itself were waiting just beyond the stone. At a narrow landing near the upper level, a small outer door opens onto the cliffside path. A sheltered terrace laid in worn stone and bordered by a low wall rough with age. The archivist lifts the latch with the same quiet care given to ledgers and lamp fittings. The iron gives a soft, familiar note. Then the door yields inward, and the night enters all at once. Cool, clear, and spacious. For a moment, there is only the change itself. The air outside is wider than any room, though the terrace is small. It carries the clean taste of salt and the faint mineral scent of damp rock. It moves over the face and hands with a patient cold, not severe, only wakeful. Behind, the lighthouse keeps its stored warmth in stone and stair and lamplit wall. Before, the sea opens under the moon in long, dark plains brushed with silver. And above it, the sky is clear from horizon to height. The archivist steps out and lets the door settle gently closed. Here, the sounds arrange themselves differently. Indoors, the sea had been translated through stone and timber into murmur and tremor. Out here, it speaks more plainly, though still in the softened manner of distance. Water folds and loosens along the rocks below. A slower wash reaches into the coves beyond the cliff. Farther out, where the beam will pass in another moment, the surface lies dark and level, holding moonlight in thin, shifting seams. Somewhere beyond sight, a buoy gives its low, rounded note, and the sound seems to float upward rather than travel across. The beam turns. It comes first as a whitening over the terrace wall, then a pale movement over the archivist's sleeve, then a slow, passing brightness that glides out over the water and away into open distance. Nothing startles in it. The light moves with the same grave consistency as before. But under the stars, it seems even gentler. A known hand laid briefly on stone, on grass, on sea. When it has gone by, the dark that follows is not emptiness, but rest. And then the stars are visible again in their hundreds. The terrace curves close to the tower, protected from the stronger wind by the broad shoulder of stone. Tufts of cliff grass lean beyond the wall, silvered at their tips. Small white flowers, nearly closed for the night, hold a little moonlight in their petals. The path itself is uneven with age, each stone worn by weather, each edge softened by salt and time. The archivist walks only a few slow paces along it, enough to feel the tower at the back and the open world at the front, enough to stand where both can be kept in one quiet glance. Below, the cliff falls away into shadow and pale surf. Above, the stars are so numerous that the eye cannot settle on one for long. They gather in clear drifts and faint patterns, some sharp as pinpoints, others breathing softly through a thin veil of sea air. Between them are broad reaches of darkness, deep and calm. The moon stands a little westward now, whitening the upper edges of the waves and laying a long, broken brightness across the water. The horizon is visible, not as a line alone, but as a meeting of silences, the sea's dark breadth rising to the sky's larger stillness, the archivist rests a hand on the low stone wall. It is cold, faintly damp, and rough beneath the palm. Grains of salt have dried there in places, left by older weather. The wall, like the stair, like the brass rail, has its own memory of touch and season. It has held winter rain, summer heat, the pause of gloved hands, the leaning of shoulders during long watches. Now it holds this clear night, this hour between one note of the buoy and the next. The lighthouse stands just behind, not looming, but companionable. Its pale stone catches moonlight along one side and keeps the other in a soft shadow. High above, the lantern chamber glows and dims by turns as the apparatus revolves. Through the glass, now bright, now briefly veiled, the lamp continues its patient work. The whole tower seems to breathe in that rhythm, brightening, easing, brightening again. Even here outside, where the sky is immense and the sea unbounded, the lighthouse remains a near and human scale of steadiness. Steps, rail, latch, glass, page, hand. The archivist looks out over the water as one might look over an open book, whose language is known not by translation, but by long familiarity. No single wave asks to be remembered, and yet the night stores itself. The moon's position above the horizon, the coolness of the stone underhand, the way the beam reaches over the outer shoal, the low buoy note, softened by distance, the faint shine along a seam of current farther from shore. These things do not insist. They simply arrive, and in arriving, become part of what is kept. Another turning of the light passes overhead. For an instant, the cliff path, the grass, the archivist's sleeve, the rough top of the wall, all grow pale and distinct. Then the brightness moves on and lays itself over the sea, where it travels in a long, deliberate band toward waters no eye from shore can wholly follow. Perhaps somewhere beyond the visible dark, a deck glances white for a second. Perhaps a window aboard some passing vessel receives that light and lets it go. Perhaps no one sees it at all, but the sea itself. Still, the beam turns, as it has turned through clear nights and hazed ones, over calm water and winter swell, over remembered ships and unnamed distances. The archivist remains where the path is most sheltered and lets the vastness be vast. There is no need to measure it here, no need to write yet. The ledger waits below with its open page. The pen waits in its familiar place beside the amber lamp. The old logbooks remain on their shelves, carrying their fragments of red-brown sail, of low smoke over calm water, of moons behind haze, and winds set down in careful hands. All that keeping continues. But for now, under the stars, the work is simpler. To stand, to breathe the salt air, to feel the tower near at one shoulder, and the open sea before the eyes. To receive the night without dividing it, The land behind the lighthouse is quiet too. Though unseen from this side, it can be felt in the stillness of the grass inland, in the sleeping fields beyond the cliff road, in the dark roofs of distant cottages turned toward their own dreams. Sea and shore, tower and path, moon and lamp are all held together in one broad hush. Nothing is separate in such an hour. The stone keeps the warmth it gathered by day. The ocean keeps the moon in broken silver. The sky keeps its innumerable lights. And the archivist, standing between them, keeps nothing by grasping, only by attending. So the moments pass without needing to be counted. The buoy sounds again, low and rounded. The beam turns again, crossing the terrace wall. The archivist's hand, the grass, the sea. The waves continue their patient folding below. And under the clear field of stars, with the lighthouse close and the night stretched wide on every side, solitude feels less like being alone than like being gently accompanied by everything that remains awake. Chapter 8. The Turning Beam. After a time, the archivist turns back toward the small outer door and steps once more into the tower's shelter. The change is slight, but familiar. The air loses the open breadth of the cliff and gathers itself into cool stone, old wood, brass, and the faint, dry warmth that the lamp and its workings lend to the upper rooms. The door closes with a softened weight. Outside remains outside. Stars above the sea, moonlight on the long water, the low wall silvered by the passing beam. But none of it is shut away. It comes inward, changed, translated through glass and masonry into murmurs, drafts, and a steady, surrounding hush. The stair curves down a little beneath the lantern chamber, and there, on a landing the archivist knows as well as any corner of the tower, a small chair waits beside the wall. Nearby, a narrow table holds the open ledger left earlier in the night, the pen resting across its page, the amber lamp still burning low and patient. Above, not far above at all, the mechanism continues its measured labor. There is the low, revolving hum, the mild, periodic click, the almost imperceptible tremor that passes through rail and stone whenever the great light completes another part of its turning. The lighthouse never seems to strain. It simply continues. The archivist sits. For a little while, nothing more is asked of the night than this: to be heard, to be felt, to be accompanied. The sea is below, though below is not the right word for something so present. It is under the cliff, around the rock, beyond the windows, along the dark reaches of the coast, and somehow also in the tower itself, in the salt that lives in the joints of wood, in the pale bloom on old brass before it is polished, in the softened edges of ledgers, in the coolness of the stair. Its wash comes upward in long breaths. Between those breaths, there are smaller sounds. the touch of water in a narrow cove, the distant buoy giving its low and patient note, wind slipping along stone and then easing away. The beam turns. Though the archivist is no longer standing beneath the stars, the movement of the light is still visible everywhere. It passes at the edge of the landing window. It brightens the wall for a moment, then lets it soften again. It touches the brass rail with a pale glide, finds the worn curve of the stair, and moves on. In the records room below, it will be crossing the shelves now, then the desk, then the bindings of old logbooks with their faded cloth and stitched repairs. Out over the sea, it will be laying the same calm hand upon dark water, upon the remembered line of the outer shoal, upon distances where ships once wrote themselves briefly into these pages, and then went on. The archivist reaches for the pen. There is no hurry in the gesture. The hand settles, the nib touches paper, and a few small words are added to the night's entry. Not much. A note on the clarity of the sky. A note on the buoy's sound carrying cleanly in the cool air. A note, perhaps, on the steadiness of the wind now that the hour has deepened. The ink darkens, then dries. The pen is lifted and laid aside once more. The page remains open. So much of the lighthouse's keeping is like this. Not the grand preserving of things, but the quiet one. A tide height, a moon above the water, a sail once seen beyond the shoal, smoke low over calm water, wind north by east, the sea washing among rocks that have heard these same notations in one form or another for longer than any ledger can hold. The archivist does not try to gather all of it, only enough to honor its passing, only enough to let the night know it has been noticed. Above, the lamp turns with grave consistency. Its hum settles into the body of the tower until it is difficult to say where mechanism ends and silence begins. The stone seems to keep the sound, rounding it, holding it, giving it back more softly. The chair beneath the archivist has its own small language of age. A faint wooden ease, a polished arm smoothed by use. The stair carries old footfalls in its worn centers. The brass rail, cleaned earlier, keeps a dim, sleeping gleam. Glass high above receives the beam and releases it again over the water, over the sleeping coves, over the black, slow-breathing distances. Another turn. Another quiet brightening of the landing wall. Another soft withdrawal. The archivist looks toward the narrow window. Only a portion of the world is framed there. A slice of sea, a little sky. One star held for a moment before the beam's pale sweep passes, and the star returns to itself. It is enough. The night does not need to be seen all at once. It can be known in portions. The edge of a wave, the shape of a cloudless dark, the silver line where moonlight catches the swell, the brief gleam on the low terrace wall outside. Piece by piece, the whole vastness becomes gentle, Below, somewhere lower in the tower, wood gives a familiar creak as it settles. The sound rises and fades. The archivist listens without turning. Every level of the lighthouse has its own manner of speaking. The entry remembers the sea in the latch and threshold. The records room keeps paper, dust, and salt. The stair keeps echoes. The lantern chamber keeps light. Together, they make a kind of sheltering conversation that asks for no reply. And still the sea, and still the buoy at long intervals, and still the revolving hum. The archivist leans back a little, not from weariness exactly, but from trust in the hour. There is comfort in the fact that the work has become so simple. The brass has been polished. The panes have been checked. The tide has been entered. The old books have been opened and closed again. The stairs and windows and cliff path have all offered their portion of the night. What remains now is the gentlest task of all: to stay near, to listen, to let the lighthouse continue in one's company. The lamp on the table burns steadily, its amber circle small beside the greater light above. It warms the edge of the ledger page, the archivist's hand, the grain of the narrow table. Beyond that circle, stone gathers shadow in soft folds. Then the beam turns and lays a cooler brightness over everything for a breath. And then that too passes, leaving the amber lamp to keep its modest watch below the larger one. Nothing insists. The night does not press forward. It widens and softens. One turning beam follows another out across the sea. One wash of water follows another along the rocks. The pen rests. The page waits. The brass holds its dim shine. The tower hums in its old familiar way, weathered and tended, quiet and alive. And if, after a while, the archivist writes one more line, it is only because the hand is there, and the page is there, and the night, in all its salt-cooled stillness, continues to offer itself gently to be kept. Then again there is listening. Again the low hum above. Again the pale sweep passing the window, the wall, the rail, the stair. Again the sea below, never absent, folding and unfolding in the dark. The lighthouse goes on turning through the clear night, and the archivist remains within its slow circle of light, where the stone is cool, the lamp is warm, and every small sound settles into the next, softer and softer, as though the tower itself were breathing with the water far beneath, and would keep breathing so for hours yet, with the ledger open, the pen at rest, and the beam moving on.